with that, we're going to move on to our primary topic for the evening, kind of one of our bigger ones, right, is the demystifying the Twitter hack. Now, we'll kind of rewind a little bit to last Wednesday's stream. We were on stream last Wednesday, and towards the end of the stream, my text messages and chats started to blow up, and started to talk about something that was happening in Twitter. And so during one of the breaks, I quickly ran out and tried to see what we could find about what was going on. And lo and behold, Twitter was undergoing some type of hack. And little was known about it at the time. All that we really had was kind of this support message that we had here from Twitter support that said that they are currently aware of a security incident that's impacting accounts on Twitter that they were investigating. Ultimately, that's a good thing, right? We want to see rapid acknowledgement of security incidents. The tweets kind of continued. They locked down the ability to reset passwords and things like that. And so obviously this kind of led us to believe that something had happened specifically around user access of certain accounts, and obviously some of us really got kind of worried up front because we had thought of some type of credential breach. Somebody had gained access to some database that had credentials of everybody on Twitter, and so that really kind of started to get the juices rolling quickly as to what type of damage. You hear me refer to the plume pretty frequently, but what type of plume could have potentially happened from this type of attack. And then later that night they started to restore Twitter access. They indicated about 9:30 that they had they were continuing their investigation, but they were at least able to release what they knew so far. And this is where we kind of get to the crux of where most of us were interested in, right? So about 9:38 p.m. Now, I'll tell you right now, this is, we like this in the security industry. This is transparency, at its finest, right? They knew that something had happened. They knew the entire world was watching them. And so as a result, they went ahead and took the initiative to try and, kind of get out in front of it and let, people know that, yes, there was indeed some type of cyber attack that had happened. And so in this case, they had admitted that they had detected what they believed to be a coordinated social engineering attack by people who successfully targeted some of their employees with access to internal systems and tools. So let's break this down a little bit, right? Social engineering. Whenever you hear terms like phishing, as a matter of fact, if you go back a couple streams ago, right, we actually specifically talked about the know before and security awareness. And so social engineering, right, is that ability as an attacker to trick you as a user into divulging something that you otherwise shouldn't have divulged in the first place. In this case, it looks like they were attacking some of the employees of Twitter that ultimately had access to internal systems. And so now we've kind of got this interesting scenario going on where, okay, this was a successful social engineering attack on employees inside of Twitter, and they had access to some of the Twitter tools. This included, and you can see we scrolling down to see access to take control of many high visibility accounts and tweet on their behalf. And this is really kind of where we're going to kind of divert a little bit from the conversation. We're going to talk about this tweet here in a little bit, but that they were looking into what other malicious activity could occur. So what did these guys tweet? So now take it for a second and use your imagination here on this. Let's say that you had access. Let's say that you were the hacker and you had done some type of coordinated social engineering attack and had successfully gained access to the entire Twitter platform. And just to put some statistics out on that, right, there are currently, as of 2020, 330 million active users on Twitter, with about 145 of those daily on an active basis, right? Some other tweets, right? 40% of Twitter users who saw a tweet on Twitter carried out a purchase after seeing it on Twitter. So 40% of those, 145 million daily active users, that makes it a pretty massive marketing platform. And ultimately, that's what we saw that the hackers were going after, was the vast amount of reach that you could get on this platform. So what exactly did this tweet look like? What they had done was they had access to and we'll talk about what they had access to here in a little bit, but they basically had access to create tweets of some of the most famous verified accounts. And you can see this by this little check mark right here. If you ever see a check mark like this on Twitter, those are verified accounts. And so what they had done was they had access to all of these verified accounts, and they were posting this tweet. The tweet said, all Bitcoin sent to the address below will be sent back double. If you send 1,000, I'll send you back 2,000, only doing this for the next 30 minutes. And then there's others that, and then they kind of prefaced it and used a COVID-19 related theme on top of this. And so you can see we've got Mike Bloomberg here. You got Kanye West's Twitter account. They did Barack Obama's, they had Joe Biden's, they had Elon Musk, they even had Apple's Twitter account as well. You can see the Bitcoin, you see this address right here. This is the Bitcoin address. We'll get into the Bitcoin piece here in a little bit. Don't stress about that, but we want to kind of focus on taking it in small chunks, right? So you can see that all of these tweets were exactly the same, which meant that this was definitely pre-planned. They had the message planned out already. They knew that they were going to go ahead and conduct this attack. And then the final one that we kind of have here, right, is Jeff Bezos's Twitter account, where again, I've decided to get back to the community. This one was a little bit different, right? All Bitcoin sent to my address will be sent back doubled. I'm only doing a maximum of $50 million. How generous of Jeff Bezos, right? And then of course we see that same Bitcoin address down here. So if you're looking for indicators, right? If you're watching this and you're still pretty unfamiliar with social engineering, right? If it's too good to be true, it probably is. There is no way for this many high profile individuals to make a claim like that across the internet all at the same time without there being a lot of positive buzz for it through mainstream media, as much as people hate about that, or anything else. And so there's lots of avenues to this that kind of indicate for you that this is a phishing tag, right? Number one, it's too good to be true, right? Number two, there's a sense of urgency, right? This is almost always a key indicator of something that's a phishing attack. Is I'm only doing this for the next 30 minutes. Attackers do that because that's how they try to get you baited in. Was if they give you a limited amount of time, then you have that FOMO, right, or that fear of missing out. And so they use that fear of missing out to try to entice you into acting now and making sure that you can go ahead and execute on it right when they want you to. Also, in this case, they knew that this type of hack would gain a lot of visibility and would probably get them caught pretty quickly. And so this 30 minutes was really kind of just a traditional smash and grab when it comes to that type of theft. Was they knew they had to get in, do their message, and try to get as much money as humanly possible before Twitter latched onto this and got it caught down. You can kind of see some of the timestamps on this, right? As 4:17 p.m. So right before Twitter announced kind of that they had detected some malicious activity on there. Okay, so now let's talk about this Bitcoin address right here, right? Or actually, let's take a step back. We'll focus on the Bitcoin here in a minute. How exactly were attackers able to post all of these messages to all these Twitter accounts? If you remember when we first looked at the tweets and we started to analyze some of the tweets, it kind of led us to some type of account compromise. Ultimately, when you start to do some of the analysis as of what happened on during the hack, there were some tweets that were posted by several of the accounts that showed something like this. Now you'll see some black marks in here. These have got things blacked out to protect the names of the accounts that are shown here. But from what we've been told, allegedly, and what seems to be some of the investigation and some of the tweets that were leaked online, is that what you're looking at is actually a screen here from the inside of Twitter. So if you're a Twitter employee and you're sitting, at work at your computer, wherever it is, I actually think it's at home now because I think Twitter has gone to 100% remote work, and you're administering Twitter. From that perspective, you are looking at the admin console that you would be looking at as part of Twitter. So this is that administrative access to Twitter. And so if this is a Twitter account, you're looking at how many tweets they have, You can have all the kind of control in terms of what type of access they have to their account, any type of tags that they may have about whether it's compromised, it trends on a blacklist, or whether the account's been marked as read only. You've got identity information from those accounts. So this is an email address from Orange, right, and as well as some information about that account. As well as kind of the ability to change and update the emails or even add emails to it. So this gives a potential Twitter employee complete and total access to your entire Twitter account, which is what you would expect, right? I mean, they're administering the platform, and so they've got to have a way to control their users. Obviously, they're trying to combat a lot of the things that are happening inside of social media these days when it comes to election interference or troll farms or any type of social propaganda and things like that. And so they've got to have access to these consoles to be able to look at users and evaluate them and decide whether they're going to block them or not. So you would absolutely expect this to happen. This shouldn't come as a shocker that this panel exists, but what this does show you is that because we can see images of it now, clearly the attackers had access to internal Twitter systems, and so now really the question becomes is how they got access to those internal Twitter systems, and we'll get to kind of some of the theories around that in just 1 second. The other thing that I want to kind of dive deep into here is Bitcoin. Now, Bitcoin could invariably be its own stream altogether, and so our goal here is not to do the life and times of Bitcoin by any stretch of the imagination, but do want to try and have a notional conversation about what Bitcoin is, so that we can have a conversation as to why this worked and how successful this is, and how some of this money will absolutely never be recovered. Okay. So what is Bitcoin? I'm sure you've heard of Bitcoin by now. Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency, which is really just saying that it uses complex mathematical algorithms to basically define a currency inside of a system. It was actually invented in 2008, so it's really relatively new from a currency perspective. But the problem is that it was invented by an unknown person or group of people. So even the creation of the Bitcoin concept is completely and totally anonymous. But the idea was when this person or this group of people invented Bitcoin, what they had decided was they had thought that the current financial mechanisms that were in place were not reliable. I hate to use the word corrupt, but I know a lot of folks out there that would absolutely call the current financial system corrupt. But it was a way to have a decentralized digital currency, whereby its peer-to-peer network provided it with a way for everybody to have full transparency on what was going on inside of the financial system. And so it had a rocky start. I mean, there's a lot of really good history about how Bitcoin got started. It was quickly adopted by a lot of kind of progressives and as well as just techno nerds who were just interested in using the idea of a decentralized currency concept. A lot of people bought Bitcoin for its just kind of intrinsic value, and you kind of see it kind of take off through the 2010s 2012s until it finally hits a peak in 2018, where it started, really with a really low value, right, of a few $100s or a few hundred pennies, right, per Bitcoin, all the way growing up to January of 2018, where one Bitcoin what was actually worth upwards of about $13,000 per Bitcoin. I think it hit a high of about $19,000 at some point in time, because everybody really thought that they were gonna get rich off all the Bitcoin that they bought in 2008. But here's where it's different, right? Bitcoin is not backed by gold. So if you've ever studied finance, and I am by no means a finance major whatsoever, but when you talk about your dollar bill or your euro or the British pound or whatever the case is, those currencies are backed by gold, allegedly, in banks like the Federal Reserve and all across the world. And so that currency has something that if we ever had to go to task on turning over that money and saying, well, provide proof that you have value for the money that you've got, technically you could get that money in gold. Now there's a lot more complications in it because I think I'd have to recall, but I think it's technically illegal to actually own a bar of gold now. But either way, so the difference is that with Bitcoin, it's actually not backed by any hard currency currently. Its value is purely intrinsic and purely at the whim of the folks who have contributed to the network. And so because of that, the market volatility is just really crazy. And so case in point, right, is in 2017 and 2018, we saw the Bitcoin price really start to skyrocket. But then, kind of around that same time, right, is China, I think around 2018, somewhere around there, 2017, right? China first started to ban Bitcoin. And, once that ban was complete in February of 2018, then you actually saw Bitcoin prices fall all the way down to about the 6,000 range in February of 2018. And so then you constantly see Bitcoin's price flux. As a matter of fact, if you, there's a really, really good website out there called Coinbase, right, where you can go and you can actually, monitor and watch the price of Bitcoin. It's almost like going to Market Watch or something like that and watching the market prices go up and down. And so, Bitcoin has become one of those things where it's almost traded on a day trade scenario, just like normal money is. Shortly, kind of around that same time period, right, as Bitcoin was going, you kind of saw the rise of altcoins, or you saw the rise of people who were creating cryptocurrencies to really kind of break away from the normal pack of cryptocurrencies and create lots of deviations. And so that's why when you go to Coinbase, you'll see like Bitcoin, you'll see Ethereum, you'll see Tether, XRP, you'll see all the names of all the various, cryptocurrencies that are out there and their current value. And so you can see that over the last 10 years, right, cryptocurrency has blown up. So what? So what was the appeal of cryptocurrency? Transparency was huge, right? People enjoyed the transparency part of what crypto meant, right? Because of this technology that they referred to as the blockchain, that meant that every transaction that happened inside of Bitcoin was public knowledge. It had a public ledger of all Bitcoin transactions. So let me kind of show you what that means for a second. So if two people here, it's you and your brother, right, or you and your sister, right, want to make a Bitcoin transaction, right? You want to sell them your PS4, or your Xbox 360, right, whatever it is. When you two decide that you want to conduct a transaction, then the Bitcoin system creates this unique key for your particular transaction, right? So you're gonna pay your brother, $200 for his Xbox. There's a unique key that is created for that transaction that says that, I'm going to pay, user A is going to pay user B $200. Okay. That transaction is then sent to this peer-to-peer network, right? So all of the computers that exist on the Bitcoin network all hold a copy of that public ledger. And so those computers then all verify that transaction is legitimate and makes sense, matches some of the requirements that it needs to kind of go through. And once that has been approved, once it's been verified, then a new block is created. And basically it's just a string of information that says that on this date at this time, this Bitcoin address for user A and this Bitcoin address for user B exchanged $200 worth of Bitcoin. This is where the pseudo-anonymous piece of Bitcoin comes into play, and I'll get into that here in a little bit. Once that block has been added to the chain, that chain then gets re-updated across the entire Bitcoin network, and now that public ledger is out there for everybody to see, and then that transaction is then complete. So this entire circle is the circle of a Bitcoin transaction flow. So what, right? There's a lot of people who are typically used to, looking at their financial systems and looking at their credit card statements or bank statements. Well, gosh, it sounds like what you're telling me, Neil, is that every purchase that I make is completely and totally visible to the entire world. Yes and no, right? In this case, right, we're saying user A and user B, but in reality, what it looks like on the blockchain network is that blockchain address that I showed you before, right, from Jeff Bezos' screen. This is what's recorded in the ledger. So this, in this case, was the recipient, right? So this is user B in our example. This is the recipient's blockchain address. So that's user B's blockchain address. User A would be all of the people that ultimately fell for this scam. They have a blockchain address on there as well. And so what we're really recording isn't so much that it's user A and user B, but it's that blockchain address A and blockchain address B. And that's what ultimately gets read to the block. Okay, doesn't sound so bad, but why should I care even so much about having those transactions public? And this is where the creators of Bitcoin and a lot of the cryptocurrencies have really kind of made their stake, right? Is that the current banking system lacks transparency in how financial transactions are made, right? You can't tell who's paying off who. You can't tell where large sums of money are moving to. It's all very cloak and daggery. There's privacy regulations that are in place to prevent, just anybody from saying, well, show me all of Neil's bank transactions, right? You have to get a court order, you have to have reasons for it and things like that. And so this provides a level of transparency, so that if you wanted to see if a politician was corrupt, then, all of their transactions would be completely viewable. If you wanted to track, a drug lord laundering money, all of their transactions would be visible. And so that's a lot of the basis behind why folks got into or really cling on to the idea of Bitcoin, is that amount of transparency and the decentralization, of the marketplaces. So we kind of talked about the pseudo-anonymous piece of this. So let's talk about the pseudo-anonymous, right? And this will really kind of talk about, some of the other aspects of Bitcoin that we want to cover. So this Bitcoin address, right? It's hard to, look at this Bitcoin address and know who this Bitcoin address is associated with. That's a pseudo-anonymous piece. There is no record specifically, explicitly, of this Bitcoin address being tied specifically to a person or individual. What happens, though, is that because all of the transactions on the ledger are completely and totally public, you can track that Bitcoin address throughout its entire life. And so if you are able, in the case of this type of attack, if you were able to ultimately find where a criminal had made a mistake and had associated with this Bitcoin address with his real ID, you would then have a history of his entire transactions. And so let's say that you steal all this money. Let's say that you stole some money with this Bitcoin address. At some point in time, you've got to get that Bitcoin out of the system. You've got to turn it into real cash. At that point in time in which you turn it into real cash, that's where a lot of law enforcement really, kind of debunks that myth that blockchain is completely and totally anonymous. Now, this is very high level. So there's lots of episodes that we could do where we dive into, mixing and anonymizing Bitcoin and changing them in between different currency types to try to evade law enforcement. But once you're down that road, right, you're not talking about anything different than traditional, typical, anti-money laundering type techniques where you're washing money and spreading out across. But you can see how the pseudo-anonymous characteristics here of Bitcoin, are somewhat appealing to cyber criminals because it's widely used, it's widely accepted, it's a standard way of taking cryptocurrency, and kind of remaining pseudo-anonymous in your transactions. So I want to show you what that pseudo anonymity looks like. Okay, so this is a Bitcoin address. There are companies out there all the time that are doing blockchain analysis. Now, that's just a really fancy way of saying that they take a Bitcoin address like this and they're able to follow all of the transactions associated with that Bitcoin address. And so there's a really good website out there called blockchain.com. And so you can put in any Bitcoin address that you want to, and it will show you all of the transactions that have ever been associated with that Bitcoin address. And so here we have, again, this Bitcoin address right here, 0WLLH, right? 0WLH, right here. This Bitcoin address. So this is the Bitcoin address that was posted to all these Twitter accounts. And you can see that there were 394 transactions that were done to this blockchain address. So as of today, so this was refreshed this morning. So current Bitcoin price is 91.2544. and they totally received about 12.869. So let's do 12.869 Bitcoin multiplied by the current price of Bitcoin, which is 91.25. 91.25. So in 2 hours worth of work, these cyber criminals ran away with $117,000 in Bitcoin. 2 hours worth of work. That's not too shabby, is it? You can also see, right? So now we can see that the current balance is this much. So how much Bitcoin is that? So our current Bitcoin price, right, was 91.25. Right? Currently sitting inside of that Bitcoin address is 0.0089. $81. So as of today, they have moved all $117,000 of that completely out of that Bitcoin address, and it is off to other Bitcoin addresses. And there's people out there right now, as a result of this hack, that are, I can guarantee you, that are out there analyzing all the addresses that all this Bitcoin went to, so that they could try to identify the cyber criminal. But that right there is the transparency that you get with Bitcoin, and so it allows for a massive amount of analysis. And so now it's that traditional cat and mouse game, right? It's you've got an attacker who now has gotten away with $117,000, and now there are people out there who are trying to find out ultimately who was the recipient of that $117,000. The other thing that I should mention, kind of the way that they created the Bitcoin transaction flow, right, is that once a transaction happens, that's it. There's no undoing it. Right? Once it's committed to the block, you can't go back and say, well, that was fraud. We want that block to be removed. That's not how the blockchain was built. All transactions are final in the way Bitcoin was designed. And so this $117,000, once it's been removed from these accounts, is completely gone. And so you can see here, based on these transactions, you can see, the hash. This is that verification of the transaction, and you can see, how much Bitcoin was moved from space to space. So Bitcoin address, right? You can see movement of Bitcoin all the way down, right? So that's kind of the power of seeing that transaction. I can tell you, we talk a little bit about the pseudo-anonymous capabilities when it comes to Bitcoin. Even the FBI, right, through a lot of their leaked documentations, they have gotten very, very good at tracking Bitcoin. But it's not just the FBI. If anybody who's watching, from the state side, right, has done their taxes, right, July 15th was tax day last week. You should have seen a question on your taxes that actually asked you if you had bought, sold, or traded in digital currency. The IRS is also looking very hard at digital currency. We can get into an entire conversation about whether whether the financial systems are acknowledging that blockchain or that Bitcoin or Monero or anything like that is actually a legitimate currency or not. I think that's a fun debate. If anybody wants to come on and kind of talk about that, then let me know. We'll bring you onto the show and we'll have a good solid debate about that. But the fact that IRS is looking at it, the FBI is showing how easy it is to track Bitcoin. It's losing kind of its thin veneer of civility of being, completely totally anonymous. It doesn't change the fact that cyber criminals are using it on the regular, and I don't think we'll see that change anytime in the future just because of its adoption. But you can definitely see that the FBI has definitely indicated how easy it is to track folks with Bitcoin. However, they will also admit, through these leaked documents, that they do have an untraceable coin that they're frustrated with. So this is where, Bitcoin and blockchain has really kind of set the standard and really kind of pushed innovation when it comes to cryptocurrencies through the roof, because through Bitcoin, through what they've done with Bitcoin, they've been able to kind of accelerate the use or the creation of other cryptocurrencies, also known as altcoins. That's why we have multiple of these that are being traded here on the market, right, that you can see right here. And so the FBI has definitely admitted that, it's increasingly harder for them to track Monero, right? There you go. Sorry, highlight the right one, right? Untraceable, at least for now, is Monero. And so, while Bitcoin may be relatively accepted generally, Monero is pretty much untraceable, at least for now, by criminal or law enforcement organizations like the FBI. And so if you're a cyber criminal, you're obviously looking for ways to launder that money. You're looking at cryptocurrencies like this to be able to offload that 117,000 so that you can at least take ownership of some of that and start to spend it. Now, that's not, I don't mean to say that that's the entire premise behind cryptocurrency, right? Is the use of illegal stuff. As a matter of fact, Monero being private was not created for illegal purposes, right? The privacy behind Bitcoin was because the folks really truly wanted to have a cryptocurrency that not only provided you with fidelity and an open ledger of transactions that happened, but also completely totally anonymous, that whoever user A was behind that cryptocurrency address, you could never tie that back to a real person, because they also believe that your financial transactions should be private to an extent. Bitcoin gets a lot of adoption in countries like Venezuela and Argentina. As a matter of fact, I was on a phone call with a very brilliant engineer down in Argentina, whose economy is collapsing around them, right, and whatnot. And so they very much are huge into cryptocurrencies and investing in cryptocurrencies, because that way it's at least backed by some form of system and at least a little bit more resilient to inflation and some of the collapsing economies that are out there. They could ultimately end up taking $1,000 in Monero, right, and going to another country if they ever had to flee that country, and still have a relative equal amount of that currency, versus if you had $1,000 in Argentinian dollars, by the time you went to go leave that country, it may be worth $10. And so it's we talk about it being used for malicious activity, but there's the entire premise behind blockchain, the entire premise behind cryptocurrency was definitely there for supporting alternative ways of doing currency. So, excuse me. With that being said, now we've kind of talked about Bitcoin. Let's kind of get to some of the hows or whys this type of attack could happen inside of Twitter. Again, lots of good information out there. There's lots of good reads. As a matter of fact, Brian Krebs, if you're not familiar with him, wrote up a really good article in terms of trying to outline the investigation that he's been able to do in terms of this type of attack. And I would definitely encourage you that if you're looking for a fantastic investigative journalist, definitely subscribe to Krebs on Security if you're not already. But if you're not, or if you've already read it, one of the things that he highlights inside of his article, right, is this idea of SIM swapping. SIM swapping is not new. As a matter of fact, there has been, quite a lot of, SIM swapping type of attacks that have happened in the past. As a matter of fact, last year, Jack Dorsey, who's the CEO of Twitter, had his Twitter account, actually hacked via the method of SIM swapping. And so when we talk about SIM swapping, there's kind of a complicated flow to this, right? Where you've got you and your mobile device here, right? And so once you're targeted by an attacker, they have to gather some personally identifiable information about you. Typically, they really just need to know what your phone number is, and quite honestly, that's honestly not that hard to do. There's quite a bit of information out there about how attackers gain access to your phone number. We'll kind of hit on that here in a little bit. But once they gain access to your phone number, they can simply then call up, and again, through that use of social engineering, they'll call up your cell phone provider. So in this case, in this example, we're talking about AT&T as your cell phone provider. They call you, you call up the telephone provider, tell them that you've got a new phone, you've got a new SIM card, you need them to transfer that number over to the new SIM card. That then happens, and from there, your new SIM card that's in the attacker's device actually is now registered to your telephone number. They then use that to try to log into any of your accounts, whether it's your email account, whether it's Jack Dorsey's Twitter account, or whatever the case is. And when that SMS verification code for that multi-factor authentication gets sent to the phone, it gets sent to the attacker's phone, versus your own. well, hold on, Neil. I thought you told me that multi-factor authentication was secure. Well, multi-factor authentication is secure, right? Multi-factor authentication is the best way to protect your accounts, and I stand by that 100%. There are different ways of implementing multi-factor authentication, and that's oftentimes what we talk about in the cybersecurity space as to where things can go right or where things can go wrong. Multi-factor authentication is the best way to secure any of your accounts. The method in which multi-factor authentication is implemented is the problem. This method, whereby they send you a text message with your security code, has been debunked for at least a couple years now because of this SIM swapping technique that's been proven out. The best way to do multi-factor authentication is if you have like the Google app or the Microsoft app or even Duo Security, right, whereby you get that randomized number on your phone that you then use to plug into your multi-factor authentication box. That's the best way to do multi-factor authentication. SMS has been proven to be broken for years, but that's been used on, that's what we refer to as a SIM swapping type of attack. And so what was discovered as part of this is that on one of the hacker forums, that's out there, there's a hacker forum called OG Users, which is dedicated to account hijacking of Twitter type of accounts. There's actually a user on that forum called Chawan, who for $250, and this was taken shortly after the Twitter hack, as people were going out there and researching the forums. For $250, they would get you access to any Twitter account that you wanted to. And again, if you saw our episode on darknet markets and things like that, you'll kind of see that this is very common to what some of the forums and whatnot look like out there, right? They've got different reputation, how many people vouch for them. He's got this is the mention of an escrow. We can get into dissecting this all we wanted to, right? But you can see that he's advertising $250 for any Twitter account that's out there, right? So what this tells us is that this user already has access to some mechanism inside of Twitter with which to then turn around and sell access to any Twitter account he wants, right? So this is kind of one of those leading indicators that an account inside of Twitter has been compromised. So then how does that happen? Well, we go back to social engineering, right? There's kind of two running theories, and we'll talk about both running theories here in a little bit as to how this potentially could have happened. The first one, the easy one to talk about, right, is some type of social engineering. Somebody socially engineered an administrator inside of Twitter, convinced them to give up their credentials, and then they use those credentials to then gain access to the Twitter console that we showed you, screenshots of earlier in the stream. That's hard to digest, right? Because Twitter's a huge tech company. They protect, 330 million registered users on a platform, 140 million users that are using it on a daily basis. They should, of all companies, really be trying to be the leader of the pack when it comes to our protection of our data. Whether that is or is not the case, we probably will never know. In this case, whether they did have multi-factor authentication or not enabled on this account, and that's what makes these hacks difficult, is because we have to do a little bit of guessing. But that's the easy answer to kind of run to, is that somebody socially engineered an admin of Twitter, who then the attackers used to gain access to the Twitter console. In some of the more nefarious cases that we've seen, so this is a case of T-Mobile. So this is an article that Vice had done a number of years ago. As a matter of fact, I think it was like a year ago that they had done this one. Yeah, this one was done, right at about a year ago. So 2 years ago, sorry, 2018. So wow, look at that, almost 2 years to the day, right? Vice had done an article on SIM hijackers, and if anybody wants to, let me know. I can put the article link to this inside. Actually, I'll go ahead and put this article link inside of chat so people can read it. So again, SIM swapping, not a new technique. Something that's definitely been out there for a number of years. And so, but if you go down here, if we scroll back to where we were just a second ago, one of the key parts about this article, right? Here it is right down here, right? We talk about social engineering being the primary way in which potentially could have gained access to the console. In this case, you can see that in this particular article, they had indicated that they were able to bribe internal T-Mobile users with only like $80 or $100 to perform the SIM swap on their target. So this is what we refer to as insider threat. Okay. And that's kind of the other running theory as to how this potentially could have happened inside of Twitter, especially in a day and age where we have COVID going on. I don't know about anybody else who's watching LinkedIn or Twitter, but there are hundreds. It's sad. There's hundreds of posts on an almost daily basis of people who are getting laid off or, out of work as a result of COVID. As a matter of fact, I was just on a phone call with an individual Friday afternoon who was recently out of work. Because of COVID. And so there's a lot of incentive whenever those types of global issues type happen, whereby you can absolutely convince somebody to, take a few $100s, take a couple $100 to provide you access. And so that insider threat, that malicious insider, so in this case, T-Mobile, but what if what happened on Wednesday of last week, what if that was insider threat? What if somebody had bribed a Twitter employee to give access to some attackers? Now, whether that's direct access to the console, or whether that Twitter employee, used his access to spread that message. Again, that may be something we may or may not ever know of, but it's entirely possible that it could have been an insider to Twitter that ultimately, led to the compromise of all of these accounts. You can see here right here that so Thug and Ace that they keep mentioning here were hackers of this particular T-Mobile SIM swapping type scam that had been there. And of course, T-Mobile declines to answer those types of questions. And you can't really expect that Twitter is going to answer that type of question either. But it definitely leads itself to, an alternative possibility as to how this potentially could have happened inside of that large organization. In this case, I wanted to kind of show this screenshot as well. This is a case whereby, in the case of the T-Mobile ones, these guys had direct access. So this was done over a Skype chat for Vice during this interview. In this case, you can see that this is publicly available, accessible website for T-Mobile. Whereby in this case, these particular hackers actually had direct access to the T-Mobile console that the technicians would use, and inside of that console, you could simply put in telephone numbers, and you can access all of the information for the account, last four social, right, tax ID, SIM, all this information here, and that helps facilitate that access. If you're looking at it from a mobile endpoint perspective. So that's SIM swapping. So that's we talk about that. That's one of the theories. That seems to be a lot of the evidence that's pointing to how this entire thing potentially went down. One of the things that I kind of want to focus on with this as well is, tech companies. We rely on tech companies to protect our data. And so it is a huge responsibility of tech companies, especially in a company like Twitter, for us to talk about any potential impacts that something like this could happen. Now, in this case, these attackers were, I can tell you right now, these attackers were incredibly low level. If you talk to folks out there, the fact that they took $100,000 is chump change. They had access to the most powerful Twitter accounts in the entire world. They had, the access to, the current president's Twitter account. They had access to the past president's Twitter account. They had access to Elon Musk's Twitter account. If you've ever followed Tesla stock, right, there's things that they could have done, in that realm as well. And so, you could tell just the sophistication level of these individuals based solely on, what their motivation was. Snatch and grab $100,000 of Bitcoin and get out as quickly as possible. I'm sure that they had it in their mind that they would get more than that. I think we're all surprised that they got what they did get. But in the grand scheme of things, it's not that much. Think about what this could have been, right? Think about some of the things that have happened on Twitter here lately, what controversies we've seen surrounding Twitter. The scrutiny that companies like Facebook and Twitter and other social media platforms are under on a day-to-day basis. And think about, the art of the possible is one of the terms that I like to use about what could have happened on Facebook. Could they have started a war? Could they have manipulated the stock markets? Could they have made a nefarious tweet on something like Tesla stock or Google stock or Apple stock that could have cost those companies, hundreds, billions, trillions of dollars. What if they did get data out of direct messages? Think about, Twitter also has a direct messaging capability, right? How many direct messages are going on between organizations that are out there? Do we know if they've been harvesting direct messages between, folks on the Twitter platform? Those are things that we don't know yet at all. And so there's a lot of what ifs that are still kind of outstanding for what this hack could have meant, that I don't think we will ever know what the full potential is. But I think it does kind of bring a new light into what are companies like this doing from a security perspective to secure some of these very, very large access points that could potentially drive financial markets, social influence, or anything else out there. And so with that, we will tie off the hacking of Twitter. Hopefully that helped kind of demystify some of what was happening with Twitter, kind of how it pans out, what it means to you, things from that perspective. And we'll go ahead and move on to our next topic.